Thank you for joining us on the Serpents and Doves podcast. This is a Reformed confessional podcast of two Baptists that want to help God's people who have been sent out into this world to fulfill Jesus' command to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. We discuss the questions of our culture to help Christians give an answer. Welcome back to the Serpents and Doves podcast. I'm joined by my co-host Frank Butler. I'm Josh Walnofer, and it's great to be with you today. We're so thankful in this episode of Serpents and Doves to be sponsored by President Donald Trump, who has given us more material for this conversation. So the Washington Post this week reported, quote, Trump made the remarks Thursday during a meeting with lawmakers in the Oval Office in which they discussed protecting immigrants from Haiti, El Salvador, and African countries as part of a bipartisan deal on the status of undocumented young U.S. immigrants. Why are we having all these people from these blank hole countries coming here? Trump said. Frank, our president has given us something to talk about today.
Is that new? I feel like we always have something to talk about in relation to our president. That's what happens when you elect a celebrity as your nation's leader. There's always entertainment now, good and bad entertainment. But saying blank this entire podcast is going to get a little bit cumbersome, so let's just say Skubala.
Yeah, skubalon is the Greek word that Paul used in Philippians 3 when he said, I count all these things as dung or as waste. So we're going to say skubalon hole instead of blank hole. How about that?
I think our listeners would appreciate it, so let's do that.
All right, it's a deal. So when Trump made these really controversial statements calling other countries skubalon holes, that's going to be really hard to say. I just want to say out loud. That's going to be tough. He mentioned a bunch of nations. He mentioned African nations. He mentioned El Salvador, and he mentioned Haiti. So when you first heard about this, what did you think?
When I first heard about this, I initially reacted a little bit frustrated. Why would he say that about these people? But then I started digging in a little bit and reflecting. Let's make a distinction right off the bat that I didn't make when I first heard this, and we have to be better than this. We have to be sharper than this. He didn't say anything about the people. He said this about the countries. Calling him a racist then, or any other name. I'm not defending Donald Trump, because I'm not a...
We know.
We know. But he spoke that about their country.
So, I mean, this really struck home with me because, first off, I've been to El Salvador, and El Salvador's been economically unstable, politically unstable. It's went through many civil wars for a long period of time. Gang warfare is very serious, and I read a recent report that said 1 in 4 people are victims of crime in El Salvador, and that 40% of Salvadorians hope to leave the country within a year. It's a beautiful country, but it's a very economically depressed and very dangerous nation. And then we all know the suffering that Haiti has went through all the hurricanes and the unrest. It's just absolute devastation. And
the witchcraft.
The witchcraft is the spiritual oppression and the violence that's there. So one of the things that has been pointed out is that if you were on the ground and you were talking to someone, say in Haiti, and you said, man, this place is a dump. It's in terrible shape. They would probably say, yeah, this place is a dump. It's a mess.
They would agree with you. And to be clear, we're not defending the words he stated. Now, I don't think those words are fitting for a president at all. However, the statements itself are what we're addressing here. And yes, these countries, there's a reason people are leaving them.
Sure.
There's a reason people are trying to come here.
So are you saying that some countries are better than other countries?
To quote a podcast you and I both enjoy to listen to, I'll outright say certain cultures are better than other cultures.
Yeah, that's a shout out to Cross Politic.
That's a shout out to Cross Politic. If you guys would like to promote us on your show, we wouldn't mind. But certain cultures are better than other cultures. I have no problem saying that. A culture that is driven by a free market, capitalism, is better than a socialist culture that has people starving in the streets.
Yeah, Proverbs 29 says, when the righteous increase, the people rejoice, but when the wicked rule, the people groan. So it's not shocking. You have corrupt governments. It's going to bring corruption all throughout the country. It's like the head of the fountain is going to produce poison to everyone who drinks from it.
You're right, and I think we should take that as, we should look at what was said, and we should also take it as a warning. We should also look at these nations and heed that as a warning. Haiti, El Salvador, this didn't happen overnight. And you just quoted from Proverbs about the wicked ruling and the corruption in leadership, what will happen because of that. America needs to look in the mirror. It is not outside of the realm of possibility for us to be in that same place in the next several decades, if not the next several years.
No, that's true. In fact, been talking to a brother in Venezuela. He's a dear brother who's suffering because of socialism and because of the oppressive, tyrannical regime that has controlled that country and now has led it to the point that the president is encouraging the people to breed guinea pigs so that they can actually have protein in their diets. It is a terrible situation indeed because of evil, and they weren't that way 10 years back. It looked on the outside like a thriving socialist country. But now on the cross side of this, just as when the wicked rule, the people groan, we know when the righteous rule is blessing, and that God is faithful to this. So in 1 Kings chapter 4, it says, Judah and Israel were as many as the sand by the sea. They ate and drank and were happy. And Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms, from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines to the border of Egypt. And they brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. So because of the sacrifices of David, and because Solomon, while he made some bad decisions, especially later in his career...
It's always with the women.
Always with the women, unfortunately. Just like his father, Adam, made a bad decision and took of that fruit. And so did Solomon. He did not lead his home well. And yet, the reality is God blessed the nation because he had discernment given from God. And so it's important to say that we disagree with Trump's language, but we would say it's not racist to say that one country has the blessing of God on it or one country is doing things that would be pleasing to God. Now, the issue we might take with the president is over the fact that he does not want people from these suffering countries here. And that's a whole nother issue, isn't it?
That's an entirely separate issue. That has been an issue since this man ran for president in the first place. The conversation about immigration, the conversation about should we bring other people into our country from other nations. I'll be honest and say that we think we have a racist problem, a racial problem here in America with blacks versus whites. But you talk to most Republicans for 10 minutes, you have a racial problem that extends far beyond just the black and white barriers.
You're right. This goes to our Latin American brothers and sisters. And we need to be very self-introspective about these things. What are our attitudes? I remember years ago, I was living in a community that had a lot of racist tendencies towards those of Mexican descent. And I was in the Northeast, and there was a lot of hostility in a lot of people's languages toward them. And as I got to meet people from Mexico, and some of these were some really hardworking men, and found out some of them were believers who loved the Lord, it really was encouraging to me, because it reminded me these are people not only made in the image of God, but these were people that were brothers and sisters in Christ. And they came to this country because they wanted to better their lives. They didn't come to this country to live off the government and to reject American culture. They came because they saw value in what the American experience had.
To be blunt, they're leaving nations that are broken to come to our nation, but our nation is not too many steps away from being the same nation that they were leaving. You just brought up a second ago coming over here to live off the government and things such as that. The nation thrives better when the government is restricted as the Bible has restricted it. So we're not going to chase this rabbit too far because we'll get further off topic. But the point I want to make here is I'm okay with other nationalities, other nations coming to our country and partaking in the blessing that the Lord has given us that we don't deserve in the first place. Those complaining about it, those saying they're coming over here to take our jobs, to take our money, to take our government. Well, first off, we have to ask, why is the government doing these things in the first place when Romans 13 didn't give them that right to begin with? Romans 13 said to promote justice. These people are fleeing, and especially in cases of the Middle East, these people are fleeing from countries that we have made to be more war-torn. I'll say that, which is controversial. Yeah. And then we leave them out, hang them out to dry because we have not obeyed what Romans 13 said. We
mentioned Latin America, but also the African nations that were evidently implied by the president's statement. I mean, there has been some serious suffering in Africa, and just like in Haiti and these other places. And so we need to make sure that we don't forget that we have brothers and sisters in those nations. Some of them are crying out for help, and they're made in the image of God. They have dignity before God. And that's why we need to be very careful that rather than superanalyze the president's language, let's analyze our own hearts first and make sure that we want the best for the neighbors and fellow image bearers of God in these countries. And if they are seeking to better their lives, and if we really are the light of Christ, man, we should be shining in that as much as we have the opportunity to.
And let's take this time also to to point out that this quickly links to another conversation. That is the common refrain amongst Americans that, yeah, there's problems in our nation, there's problems all over the world, but we're still the best nation of all. So while we agreed earlier that some cultures are better than others, that's true, we also have, 53 million babies that would say that our culture's pretty bad.
You're right. They would, because they've all been martyred. So, we need to take a break, and we'll be right back for our second segment, Serpents and Doves.
Welcome back to Serpents and Doves for our second segment. I bring that up at the end of the first segment, pointing out that America's culture, though we do believe our culture is better than many other cultures, the opportunities of freedom, the ability to worship almost freely, the opportunity to make money, to take care of your family to a point, while we do believe our culture is better than others, it's not wise or biblically correct to say we're the best nation in the whole world. We still murder babies. We still profane marriage. We somehow have a court that can call a dog a cat and get away with it, referencing the marriage statement. What I want to point out with that is that there are positive aspects of our culture, there are good aspects of our culture. There's also horribly negative aspects of our culture. That goes to show us that the good stuff we have isn't because man has done great things. It's because God is a good God who blesses his people.
Yeah, great point. Anything we have that is good is from God. He's the giver of all good things. I read some controversial remarks this week from Pastor Robert Jeffress of First Baptist Dallas, Southern Baptist Church, and he said that while he would not have used the same language as Trump, he agreed with the president's perspective. And this is what he said, and I want to kind of get your opinion on it. He said, what a lot of people miss is America is not a church where everyone should be welcomed, regardless of race and background. I'm glad Trump understands the difference between a church and a country. I support his views 100%, even though as a pastor I can't use that language. The country has the right to establish what would benefit our nation the most. I don't think there's anything racist about it at all. I wouldn't let the language obscure the point he's making. Why would we allow people who will not benefit our country? We have the right to screen refugees based on the economic benefit they might bring, and we can establish the criteria we want to use. So now, you were talking about righteousness and light, and any good we have, of course, is from God. So hearing that quote, let me ask you this. Should we want America to act as a Christian nation, or should we want America to simply just do what's in our own best interest? Because we know Christianity isn't about doing what's in our own best interest. It's about doing what's best in the interest of others, loving God first, then loving our neighbor.
I disagree entirely with the statement, and I think he falls into the trap that most Christians fall into, and that is completely divorcing your nationality, your culture, your politic from your faith. As someone who doesn't uphold a theonomic view of the Old Testament, I think he's being quite consistent, actually. It doesn't apply anymore anyway. It only applies to the Christian. It doesn't apply to the unbeliever. That's not biblically sound. So I look at our nation, I look at our leaders, and I say, no, you're held accountable. You have all authority that is given to you from God. God gave it to you. You are his servant to do his will and to promote justice as he has defined it. So yes, I want to see a Christian nation. Why? Because all the authority you have comes from him. And let's go through the Old Testament and let's look at what happens to non-Christian nations. You have Pharaoh, who's destroyed. You have the Roman Empire, who's destroyed. You have
the Greek Empire,
the
Babylonians,
the Canaanites.
Persians, the Canaanites.
We can go down the list. All of these nations decided that they would rule people, that they would use the authority given to them by God, and they would determine what justice is. They would determine what evil is, and they would determine how they should rule others. And guess what? They were punished for their wickedness because they did not follow the Lord.
Preach it, brother. Good word, good word. Ezekiel 16. Verse 49 says, Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and the needy. So this was a characteristic of Sodom. Before God judged them, because there was no righteous men in the city, and because of their sexual immorality and the homosexuality that was so rampant, bottom line, these were people who had rejected God and his law and his truths. And so could that be said about America? If
yes.
we're unwilling That was a rhetorical question, and you answered it for me very clearly. If we're unwilling, because even when we're overfed, we're arrogant, we're unconcerned for those who we could help. And that starts at home too, I want to say. Again, we have like so many chronic problems in this country with homelessness, with our veterans, with poverty, with education issues, and the billions of dollars we waste that could be used to help those in need. And then when we've got people that are desperate for their very lives as refugees, and we're saying, no, you don't contribute enough. It doesn't matter that you're willing to work. It doesn't matter that you're willing to learn English. It doesn't matter that you want to embrace this culture and you want to sing proudly the national anthem and salute the flag and do all these things that most Americans who are being trained in government-educated schools want nothing to do with. These who are refugees are coming and saying, we want this American experience. And we're saying, no, you can't come in just simply because of the fact of your background. Now, that would be kind of racist, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. That would be kind of... No, let me rephrase that answer. That is racist.
Yes. So I disagree with Pastor Jeffress, too. I'm with you, and I think what you said about the law of God is so important. Christianity is apolitical and is 100% political all at the same time. It's apolitical in that it's not Republican or Democrat, but it is political in that Christ is King. He's Lord of all. And so we as Christians, we want his lordship reigning over all peoples, all hearts, all nations. The Psalms tell us over and over to sing to the nations and proclaim to the nations he is Lord. So if he's king, we want the king's law.
We want the king's law, and as has been stated by many people before me, if we don't govern, if we don't rule according to biblical justice, what will we govern and rule by? Well, it's not no justice, it's wickedness.
Injustice.
It's injustice. It's the justice upheld by man who's wicked at heart. I want a president. I want a Congress. I want a Supreme Court who fears Christ the King, who looks at the Scripture more than they look at even the Constitution. I want leaders that do that. I want to be able to say that we live in a Christian nation.
Yes, and I don't know that that really could have ever been said for our nation's past, but bottom line, we want it for the future. And we want this nation to know Christ, and that should be the heart of every believer. Don't you think that part of this is just a big distraction? I mean, this has nothing to do with policy. It has nothing to do with DACA. It has nothing to do with dreamers. I mean, this is just a big distraction from the real issues. And the world has people fighting over whether Trump said Skubala hole or not, right? And we have forgotten about the real issue. What's going to happen to these dreamers? What's going to happen to these refugees? What's going to happen to these nations that are suffering? No one cares about that anymore. We're too busy with the circus of the American media.
I'm going to sound like a conspiracist here a little bit, but the media controls the narrative. When it wants attention shifted away, it shifts the attention away, and we bite it hook, line, and sinker and follow along like a bunch of sheep. Let me just speak to that real quick. If you're a Christian listening to this, you might be in sin to not have a sharper mind than that. Jesus said to walk in truth, to be led around by a media that tells you what you're going to think, to be trained by a party, a Republican or a Democrat party, that tells you how you're going to vote and how you're going to critique politics, to do any of these things instead of listening to what the Scriptures say, instead of viewing things through a biblical worldview, instead of applying the biblical lens to all these issues, is a sinful decision. You should be, as a Christian, the sharpest mind in culture.
Yeah, we need to know, what does the Word say about these things?
We have the only consistent worldview. We have the only way to deal with reality. We have the only way to answer the hardest questions of life. We have the only way to understand justice and injustice. And yet Christians are so hell-bent to push these things to the side, to divorce them from the issues because we want to have the president we like. We should be the ones shouting from the rooftops, your culture is collapsing on itself because you don't have a foundation.
Yes, that's right. We need to get back to the foundation.
You don't have a foundation because you've denied your Creator.
Yes. Proverbs 10:11 says, the mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. And so I'll just say to our listeners, like, let's be a part of this. You know, we need to be the fountain of life. We need to point people to the real fountain, where government gets its authority from, where all truth comes from. The mouth of the wicked conceals violence. And that's exactly what we have going on right now. You and I, we have a place in this. Christ is King. He is Lord of all. And we have to ask the question, what are we doing to advance that kingdom? Let's not fall into the trap of parsing over words that have nothing to do with anything. I mean, they're foolish. If President Trump said that, they said he said it, he said he didn't say it, whatever, who cares, right? That's not the issue. The issue is, what is truth? That's what Christians should be most concerned about.
If only Christians fawned over the words of Scripture the way they do the words of Trump, we might have a church that is vibrant in the culture.
I'm tweeting that. That's going out. That is going out on Twitter tonight. Brothers and sisters, thanks so much for listening to today's Serpents and Doves podcast. This was a quick podcast. We're shooting from the hip today, but we really appreciate you being with us. We've got to close on that note. So until next time,
grace and peace. Thank you for listening today on the Serpents and Doves podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, please hit like and share with your friends. We can also be found on iTunes, Google Play, and Podbean. If you like what you heard, give us a 5-star rating. If you did not, head over to the Facebook page and tell us why. Until next time, grace and peace.